Welcome back, everyone. And it is my great pleasure to introduce our next fellow, Andrea Haller, for her presentation entitled Embracing Tension to Build Bridges of Understanding. It is also my great pleasure to welcome her personal delegation of friends and family who are with us here at the Mercy International Center. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for coming. Andrea is from the United States of America. In her current role as community coordinator with Mercy Volunteer Corps, a ministry sponsored by the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas, Andrea supports volunteers compassionately serving the United States and Guyana. Having served with Mercy Volunteer Corps in Guyana as a special education teacher, it is her joy to accompany Mercy volunteers through their development as advocates for justice and agents for change. Andrea is passionate about anti-racism work and examining the intersection of white dominance with all injustices. She has participated in a variety of intercultural and interfaith conversation and action groups through Mercy and within her local community to dismantle implicit bias and unjust systems of oppression. Through the Mercy Global Action Emerging Leaders Fellowship, Andrea is grateful to have learned in collaboration with Mercy women leaders current and emerging to combine her passions and skills to effectively advocate for change that centers the dignity of all beings and our earth. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you to all of you that are here today and all of those watching virtually and later. It means a lot for your support. As I began to think of all the different topics I wanted to cover related to justices and suffering around the world, I kept encountering the same problem, or the same question. Are the people that I want to hear this most even going to be listening? For me, in my experience, polarization has prevented me from having meaningful conversations about the issues I care about most. So that's where I started. I began with polarization and looking at the growing tension and hostility throughout the world, and especially within the United States. There are many causes to polarization, some of them being identity, attachment to ideologies, digital media that's increasing our access and the spread of information and disinformation, and the disrespect and mistrust amongst leaders and political parties and all of the constituents. However, it is in many cultures to avoid conflict and tension, especially amongst your frequent connections. I often have heard, we don't talk religion, we don't talk politics. And the problem with that is then we don't end up talking about our experiences, beliefs, and opinions, creating an insular experience that doesn't allow us to collaborate. We need other people's stories and opinions for effective change. So without this collaboration, we have less creative solutions, and then an insular experience of problem solving. You may have had an experience of this on your own. Maybe you have that one family member that says something a little problematic about immigration. Maybe they're advocating for a more harsh or violent solution. While you would like to say something in response to that, you choose not to because you don't want to disrupt the family dinner. So what's the solution to this? How about we disrupt the cycle? Instead of avoiding conflict, we could engage in these conversations to build bridges of understanding with those we disagree with. Instead of avoiding polarizing topics, we collaborate on them. We engage in conversations and share stories amongst each other. Then we might be able to find creative solutions that incorporate everyone. This in turn reduces hostility and polarization because of the collaboration. So instead of a cycle of continuing to increase polarization, we are then decreasing polarization. My research specifically focuses on how do we engage tense conversations, because it can be very uncomfortable naturally. So what we look at, this is possible, In Cambodia, after many, many years of harmful atrocities, they were able to collaborate empathetically with one another to implement the win-win policy of 1998. In this policy, all political parties were recognized for their dignity and their contribution to peace and reconciliation. And with that agreement at the center was human dignity, and they were able to move forward and grow the peace and reconciliation. Now, we may not be able to solve the distrust and frustration within a whole country, but we could bring a little bit of peace and understanding to our circles. So what I have done in my research is looked at best practices for communication and conversations that can help us build bridges. We'll look today at 3 different formal conversation and advocacy models, those being nonviolent communication, courageous conversation, and revolutionary love, and how those connect into mercy. And then from these, we can try and use those principles to engage in conversations and then reflect on those conversations for continued growth. So by the end, you'll see a reflection and conversation guide. So this first practice is nonviolent communication. It's a formal process for engaging in conversation that centers compassion, empathy, and caring for one another's needs. You'll see in just a minute that it is very structured, but there is a lot that we can learn from this type of conversation. So we start with observations. We make an observation about a particular action without attaching any judgment. And in naming that observation, we are open and respectful and communicate that not only through our verbal language, but also our body language. So this is attending to tone, the terms or vocabulary that we're using, our posture, and gestures. At this point, we're also mindful of the power dynamics. They may impact what you feel comfortable communicating and what the other person is comfortable communicating or receiving. In this, you may start with the phrase, "I notice." An example of this is a Mercy volunteer community. One community mate in particular has noticed that they aren't seeing much of the other and feels like maybe they're being avoided or there's some conflict that's not been named. Instead of saying, "I feel like you're avoiding me," they choose to say, "I notice that we haven't seen much of each other this week." This clearly communicates the exact observation without judgment. Next, the feelings are stated. Instead of communicating something like, "I feel ignored" or avoided, you can say, "I feel lonely." This communicates exactly how you are feeling and not the projected action of another. Ignored or avoided applies that they're trying to avoid or ignore. Then nonviolent communication communicates the need, believing that every conflict is due to an unmet need or the fear of having an unmet need. So to state your need, you're able to bring compassion to the conversation. We all have needs. We all have similar needs. There are universal human needs. So to be able to say, "I need to feel connection" in this story of volunteers is a way to engage the mutual need of feeling connected and not placing blame. So, "I feel lonely because I need to feel connection now." The last step of nonviolent communication is a request. So the participants will then make a request in the form of a question. It is not a demand or an ultimatum, and you should be open to hearing the answer no, as it is a question. So in this situation of the Mercy volunteer, they ask, "Are you willing to spend time with one another this evening while we do some crafting and chatting?" That is a way to share the request in a way that conveys your compassion without blame. So this cycle can continue until a resolution is found. If you get the response no, you may need to allow the other to move through this process as well. Some of the key takeaways that we can use in our conversations are to be present to the conversation. We're not going to be able to hear the needs of another if we're unable to be present to that conversation or distracted from the conversation. We also want to be attentive to the power dynamics, knowing that that may impact what's communicated and what's not communicated. We also want to connect to our values. Instead of attaching a judgment onto the actions or experiences of another, we can recognize it as a shared need that we have, knowing that we value other people's needs being fulfilled as well as our own. Again, this is judgment-free communication. It helps us to develop and understand the compassion and the needs of the other. And finally, we focus on hearing the needs. It may not be obvious while you're sitting at your family dinner. You may not hear that the other person is feeling an unsafety of not knowing what migration looks like or how it might impact them. So then we can respond to that specific need. Their need isn't unjustified. They're allowed to feel unsafe, but what we can do is provide a feeling of safety and clearer understanding so that maybe the bridge will be built between us. All right, next we are looking at courageous conversation. This is a very specific protocol used for racial disparities within the education system. Its intention is to dismantle any of those racist systems, but it is incredibly informative of how to be courageous in our conversations of bridge building. So it starts out with these 4 agreements. These are usually made between all of the participants. In our case, since these are informal conversations, it may just be us making this agreement to ourselves. So we commit to staying engaged in the conversation when it gets tough. We speak our truth, our whole truth, and just that truth. We accept the discomfort. These are going to be uncomfortable conversations. That's why we've been avoiding them. So if we can accept and go into the conversation knowing it will be uncomfortable, we may be able to make it through farther. And then we expect non-closure and accept that. Since these are polarizing conversations that we're going to engage in, it is highly unlikely that we will come to a full agreement by the end. And that's okay. It can just be a conversation of understanding. In a recent interaction between a student from the Philippines, he had the opportunity to share with Pope Francis some of his concerns in his area as part of the synod and synodality. He shared his experience of stigmatization, outcasting, and bullying due to his mother not being allowed to have a divorce and his identity as part of the LGBTQIA+ community. He directly addresses the church's impacts on these issues due to the stance on divorce and the Pope's recent use of homophobic slurs repeatedly. This student engaged the Pope Shirley through his courageous voicing of his story. He told his truth exactly how it was, despite his discomfort. And he accepted non-closure. The Pope sort of avoided responding to him. So he met all of these agreements, even though it was just himself agreeing to those. Courageous conversation also provides kind of the step-by-step of a conversation guide for us, beginning with engaging the conversation. It's helpful to have a very specific focus and to be able to share our own stories. This makes the conversation relevant and purposeful when we are engaging. We then sustain the conversation by balancing our participation. If this is something we feel like maybe we know a lot about or we feel like our opinion's better, we might dominate the conversation. What we want to do is ask meaningful, thoughtful questions that come from a place of seeking to understand. We also want to monitor the conversation. If someone is withdrawing, it may be time to end. If someone is building up walls, it may be time to move on or refocus the conversation. And finally, we deepen the conversation. This is when we dive into the discomfort. We know it's going to happen. These conversations simply wouldn't exist if this didn't. We want to take the chance to reshape or affirm our perspectives as well. If we're going to engage in these conversations, we also have to be mobile and flexible in building our bridges. And then because it's polarizing, we have to accept that there is non-closure. Courageous Conversations provides this compass, which is helpful in kind of monitoring where we are in the conversation. We can look at this in two ways. One, where we come in, and two, where others come in. So you'll see in the first quadrant is the moral section. These are our deep-seated beliefs. Oftentimes, it's hard for us to explain why we feel that way. We have the intellectual section, which is more facts and figures related to the issue. We have acting, which is very much, relational, which is action-based, what actions have taken and what we're willing to do. And then emotional, which is those feelings that we feel internally and probably manifest physically. So when we enter a conversation, we enter from one or maybe two of these areas. You may have a deep emotional connection to what you're talking about, but the person you're talking to may be coming from a very intellectual place of facts and figures. So what we are able to do is shift our approach to the conversation more towards the middle and try and bring the other person in towards the middle. If neither of us is able to be flexible and move towards the middle, we should consider pausing, shifting, or ending the conversation for now. This helps us create that balance and being able to sustain the conversation. From Courageous Conversations, what we take into our conversation guide and reflection is storytelling and truth sharing as a way to engage, mindful questions that draw the other person in and their flexibility, meeting people where they are, so being able to acknowledge that maybe this is an issue they understand more from one perspective than the other, and deepening and challenging our own perspectives, being willing to move and reconsider, and then expecting the discomfort and non-closure of a polarizing conversation. Finally, Revolutionary Love. This was designed by Valerie Carr, who is a sick woman in the United States that experienced quite a bit of devastation after 9/11. So she created this as an advocacy tool that focuses on our interconnectedness with one another as an approach to building bridges. It's all centered around love and being able to love one another, the people we don't agree with, and ourselves. So each wedge is one of those people. We have the others, the opponents, and then ourselves. So I'll start with others. She invites us to see no stranger in interacting with another, often saying to herself, "You are a part of me I do not yet know," or "You are a part of me I do not yet understand." The reality is we're connected and we can do better to understand one another. Once we find that connection with this sense of wonder and maybe awe of another, we're able to truly hear their story. And in truly hearing their story, we may feel grief alongside them. We accompany them through their hardship, their struggles with injustices. And that provides what she names fight, but we may call a nonviolent term work here. But this provides the work towards a more just society. And then we look at the opponents, a particularly challenging wedge, but one that will come up often in polarizing conversations. She defines opponents as those who have caused harm towards us or society that are directly influenced with these injustices. And she challenges us to tend to their wound. This begins with rage, to truly feel the anger that has come up because of the injustice caused. However, we can turn that rage into what she calls divine rage, a rage that instead of bubbling up in the moment is actually informative, intentional, and can be harnessed. We use that rage to again ask the question in wonder, "You are a part of me I do not yet know." This gives us the chance to ask the question, why do they feel so strongly? What hurt or fear do they carry that makes them feel this way? And we allow ourselves to truly listen to their story. Once we've heard that, together we can reimagine. This becomes our fiercest ally when we're able to do that, so that we can work together to find a way for both. In relationship with ourselves, she likens this to labor, the breathe and then push, because justice is a labor of love. So we begin with breathing. Now, of course, we breathe every day. We have to. But she invites us to deep centering breath, one that when we feel rage, we can come back to ourselves. From there, we are able to push through the challenges, not only the challenges in interacting with people, but also the challenge of attending to our own wounds, the ones that cause us to have particular judgments or fears. And lastly, we transition. This looks like going from a place of rage or uncertainty to a place of joy, to one that finds more just solutions. And in that moment, we can celebrate while also looking ahead to what can be done next. And all of this comes joy. I want to share a story that she shared with you. During her studies, she spent some time in Guantanamo Bay when she visited the military commissions for Omar Khadr, who was arrested at the age of 15 years old, captured in Afghanistan with the accusation that he had thrown a bomb that killed a soldier. While detained, it's believed that he was severely tortured, both physically and mentally. And now at the age of 23, she came to watch his trial, report on his trial. During that, she looked at him with a sense of wonder to understand how he ended up here, and she grieved with him at the loss of his childhood. He grew up a child soldier. It was not his choice to do this. She, at that moment, felt the fight or the work that she needed to do for justice. She wanted to beg the American public to listen and to hear his story so that he could restore his dignity. And just the same day, she encountered an American soldier who immediately approached her in anger and frustration that people were coming with sympathy for these prisoners. But he expressed that he was also not given freedoms, that they have more freedoms than we do. They get to do whatever they want, and we do not. They get whatever they want, and we do not. Now, of course, she bubbled up with rage at this, that he is an imprisoned 23-year-old that's been here since he was 15 and tortured. But she took that moment to pause and breathe and said, "He is a part of me I do not yet know." And as she thought and heard more of his story, she noticed that he did have a wound. He was lonely. He was grieving. He was only a child when 9/11 happened. He believed his work was for freedom, for safety. He had watched his friends die at war. He too was a prisoner, a child soldier, but of a different kind. He was also entrapped in this institution of violence. So what does revolutionary love teach us? That we can greet people with a sense of wonder, maybe awe, saying, "You are part of me I do not yet know or understand." We can use our rage and turn it to divine rage. We can tend to the wounds and the fears of those we disagree. We can pause to breathe and care for ourselves, push through the challenges, and celebrate the transformation. Of course, the mercy world also aligns with this. And the sense of courage that Catherine McAuley brought in starting this house of mercy, she very intentionally chose to be in an area that would build bridges for the women that she was serving and the neighborhood in which she was in. We can also see that she had a lot of trust in God. She could not do the work herself and knew that it would take trust and knowing that God would bring everyone's heart to compassion and empathy. She also emphasized the community and relationship that's needed. This was a house by women for women to care for one another. So this is the final product for you, a conversation guide. What this includes is all of these principles and practices in a helpful way that we can look at what do I need to do before a conversation, what can I be mindful of during a conversation, and what happens at the end of a conversation. So this is helpful before you're trying to engage in that difficult conversation. And then there's a reflection guide, which is for after the conversation to be able to question what happened before the conversation that went well or different, what happened during the conversation, and what do I need to do after the conversation, each of these coming from the principles that we just discussed. The intention is that you can take this and enter the next conversation better each time. So where do we start? We start small, for sure. This is a challenge. We can begin with our close friends and family. Those that we know will take the fumbles, will be okay with that. And then we can branch out to people that we share most of our beliefs with, but maybe there's one topic that we intentionally avoid with this person. Then we reach out to those who we have avoided a lot of conversations that we know we disagree on. And then maybe eventually you feel confident enough to take this to authority figures or leaders that you disagree with but want to build a bridge with. This is challenging, so it takes practice. The first time you may only be able to implement one of those things that we talked about today, and that's okay. It's a start. That's what we want. So in that process, we have to be kind to ourselves, to accept the mistakes, and to do better the next time, which is exactly why we need the time for reflection, so that we can really process how the conversation went and how we could do better for the next time. So you are welcome today to download the conversation and reflection guide. You can simply scan the QR code, and that will give you a link to download. Thank you so much for your time.
It's on, yes. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. Let me open up the floor for any questions.
So I'm Cynthia from Australia. Congratulations, Andrea. That is a wonderful resource and a great presentation. I was wondering, though, do you envisage that the resource could be used in schools?
Yes, actually, thank you for that, Cynthia. Most of my research is based on work done at like the collegiate level, so colleges and universities with young adults. So it's great for that level. I imagine that it would be as well for high schools. If it were any younger than that, there may need to be some like language changes and that sort of thing, but I think the principles can still carry to younger ages too. Thank you.
This is Alexis Stevens from Guyana. A great presentation, Andrea. I wanted to ask whether you think that this resource could be used for intergenerational conversations.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alexis. That's one of the intentions that I had hoped for in making it, that it would be a bridge builder generationally with really any gap that exists, that it could translate to that. And that's intentionally why it's not specified around a particular justice issue or a particular issue where there is a gap. Thank you.
Margaret Daly, MIA Ireland. Andrea, thank you so much. It just taps into so much of what I would understand from the peace process here in Ireland. Mm-hmm. How people had to set aside maybe their own views and really listen to the other in compassion and openness. It also, Cynthia asked the question about would it translate to schools. I can see it working in primary school level, which is the junior school, because, you know, from years of experience, we try to get the children to listen to the other, hear the other pain, you know, their difficulties, maybe what, you know, and it's all about, as you say, respect. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. It was excellent. Thank you.
Thank you so much. maybe a future work is to make a kid's version of the same resources.
Hi, Jo from the UK. Andrea, thank you so much. That was such a great presentation. And I think what really touched me is, you know, we're all so passionate about our own issue, and sometimes you do get to the point where you're just like, you're wrong. And I think it takes a compassionate and a generous person to step back and think, no, actually, I am very passionate about my issue, but actually other people have views. And I think it's a tool that a lot of us could use, but I think it's brilliant. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Jo. It is a challenging thing to learn, and I think that's why it takes the practice and reflection.
All right. Oh, yes, please.
Thank you, Andrea. Sarah from New Zealand. A wonderful presentation, and you touched on being here at Bagot Street, and I was just wondering if there were any other examples, given the work that you do as well, of the sort of the contemporary Mercy community using this idea of building bridges. Yeah,
thank you so much, Sarah. Actually, in the last couple of years, the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas started a working group, essentially, to do with sexual orientation and gender identity, that there was a clear misunderstanding and maybe mistreatment within the communities. So they started this working group that sort of followed nonviolent communication in a way, that they were able to convene together, discuss their experiences and their hopes for where they saw the Mercy world going. And at the end of it, they presented some sort of requests or like recommendations for the Sisters of Mercy. So I think that's a wonderful recent example. I will also give Mercy Global Action a shout out that they're in Sparks to Fire really emphasizes the importance of continuous relationships in advocacy work.
We have something from a question from our Zoom audience.
So this question comes from Isabel Salter from Australia, and she says, "Thank you, Andrea. These are such wonderful tools for use in casual conversations about heavy topics, and some of them are as simple as taking the time to pause and breathe. I'm wondering, how do you think these tools would enhance collaboration and decision-making in rooms of high-level leaders and politicians? And can you see these being embraced at that level?"
I hope so. I would love that. I think because I've made it in a way that it's very non-specific, I think that it is a way for not only us to be able to connect in high levels when we have that opportunity, but it would be incredible for our leaders to reduce their polarization and really be ones to listen to one another.
Okay. Do we have any more questions from the audience? No, I just want to say that, Andrea, that was fantastic. I kind of want to have the conversation reflection guide in laminated pocket size as well as poster size. It's really a wonderful tool. So please join me in congratulating Andrea on a great.
Thank you.